19 years ago, almost to the day, I was planning to go on sabbatical. And I knew that what I wanted to do was to work with women and children with HIV infections and AIDS in Africa. And I'd made arrangements to go and stay with a sister who lived in Central Africa. But just after Thanksgiving, I got an email saying that she was very ill and had to be flown out. And so here I was at this time of year, about to go on sabbatical in January, and no idea how I was going to make that happen. Well, one Sunday morning, I was robed and coming into the sanctuary, everything was ready, and I met Nancy Evans, a longtime member of our congregation, who said, "I'd like to introduce you to a friend of mine." And I thought, I haven't got time to meet her friend. Reiko's probably stopped at Prelude and everybody's waiting, and here I am, and I can't talk to her. But in fact, I did stop for a minute or two, and Jane Stallman, the friend, said she was about to go off to Africa the next day. So I said, well, should you hear of anybody who would like a volunteer in January, let me know. And in fact, she met somebody who met somebody else who knew of somebody else, and eventually I was connected to Sister Sheila Flynn, who was a Dominican sister working in the East Rand, about 40, 50 kilometers southeast of Johannesburg, working with her community with women and children with HIV infections and AIDS. So I was waiting until the plane left, and I flew off to Johannesburg, very frightened, very unsure what I'd find, not knowing anybody in this community, and not quite sure what I could do. But I got there, and they welcomed me, and I'll have to describe the situation a little bit. Some of you know, some of the choir members and others went to visit South Africa about 18 months ago. But for those of you who haven't been there, it was an amazing experience for me. This high plateau, very arid, very dry, hardly a tree in sight when we got out there, and this big tip of discarded earth from the mines all the way along the horizon, blowing toxic dust over this township, which had originally been settled for miners in the gold mines, and gradually more people came, and there was no housing for them, so they built what they could with sticks and wood and bits of paper and chicken mesh and all sorts of things. And this huge expanding area of shacks had now developed to be something like 80,000 people living there, and the mines were closed, so there was no work. Sister Sheila and her community lived on the edge of this vast shack area called Sekani and Langeville. And I felt that there must be something that I could do in the community if one of the sisters could maybe show me. So I went with Sister Irene to the hospice in Brakpan, the local small town where children and women were dying of AIDS. I sat with the children, who were many of them very lethargic. I read to them, I sang to them. I sat with some of the women who were in the last stages of life. It broke my heart, but there was not really very much I could do for them. And that was a hard learning for me. So I was still waiting to find out, where was I really called? Why was I here? And Sister Nobilali took me on her rounds into the shacks to visit people and give them seeds to plant vegetables. It was a little bit of a forlorn hope because the earth was very packed and very dry, and lots of people walked over the earth around their shacks, and if there were something growing, it would probably be stolen, but still, we did go to visit shack after shack and gave people seeds. And that was an amazing experience for me, being invited into people's shacks, being welcomed, being offered a milk crate to sit on. Often a little jar would be sent with a child to run next door to find some green or yellow liquid that I could drink. They were so hospitable and so kind, these people with nothing. But again, I wasn't really doing anything very useful. I was there as a guest, a learner, but I wasn't really doing anything very useful. And my intent in going out there had been that I could serve in some way, and it wasn't happening. And then I met with the youth group, and the youth group met in this metal shed, and it was extremely hot, and we passed around a jam jar of water, and we talked about birth control, and we talked about safe sex, and we particularly talked about the transmission of the HIV virus. 2 of the young women had babies on their laps, and they were discussing these things in their lives that were pertinent. And again, I wasn't at all sure that I had a place there. I didn't think that I was very useful to them. So it was with some relief that after about a month there, Sister Sheila said that she wanted to start a women's group to learn how to make paper, so that they could maybe learn to make paper well enough that they could sell their products and earn some money. So she went to the local churches. She went to the 3 large local churches in the townships and said to the people, if there is a woman who would like to come to the gates of our community on Monday morning, I'll be happy to teach you how to make paper. And to our delight, about 40 women turned up on Monday morning, which was a huge act of faith on their part. They'd walked through a long way from where they lived to come to the gates with the hope that they would learn something of use. And so I thought that maybe I could help this group. Maybe this is what I'd been waiting for. This was my opportunity to be of help. Well, it didn't quite work out like that, because I didn't know how to make paper, so I had to learn with the other women. And we sat in the courtyard, tearing up little bits of newspaper and putting in grasses and flower petals and into this big vat of water, which we then stirred with a big stick. And then days after that had been sort of sloshing around in there, we would sieve it out, and you get this gray matted looking thing. And then we would take this damp gray matted sheet of our paper and put it under a board, and the largest woman in the group would be standing on the board to squeeze out the water. And then after that, we would hang it on a clothesline with clothespins, and it would hang there for a while, and then we would take it in and iron it. And after all of this, you had a really ugly piece of gray matted paper. But it was a wonderful way of getting to know these women and share stories, and they were amazing. They speak 5 or 6 languages, but all of them managed to speak enough English to speak with me. And so I felt privileged to be part of this group, but I wasn't helping. And my idea had been that on my sabbatical, I would be helpful to somebody. The only thing that I could do for that group, which called itself Kopenang, which means coming together, because they were women from different language backgrounds, different ethnic backgrounds. The only thing that I could do that was useful was to make sandwiches for their lunch. So Sheila and I would make piles of bologna sandwiches and piles of sliced cheese sandwiches. And I was amazed at the women wanting to have A, so many sandwiches, and B, earlier and earlier every day they asked for their sandwiches. And I asked Sister Sheila about this, and she said, they probably haven't eaten since yesterday, and they're taking so many sandwiches because they're taking them home for their families who are hungry. So I continued working with the women and with Sister Sheila, and just being part of the group, really, but not honestly being very helpful. Until the day before I left, I was still anxious. What am I waiting for? What is supposed to happen here? And then the day before I left, I went to visit my friend Tembi in the shacks, and we sat and talked for a while. And then she saw her husband, who was drunk again, coming down the track, and she said, I think maybe you should leave. So she walked with me to the road, and then she hailed a friend who was in a pickup truck and asked him if he could drive me up the road. And I remember this moment of sitting in the back of the pickup truck, and the sun, a bright red sun, was sinking into the flat lands below the horizon. And I was incredibly happy. I didn't want anything. I wasn't waiting for anything. I was just there in the truck, bumping along that dirt road, watching the sunset, and it was enough. And the next day, before I flew, the sisters made a little chapel service of goodbye for me, and they gave me a blessing. And their blessing was, do less, be more. Do less, be more.